Let me make sure I'm recording the right thing. Speaker. No. Gallery. Okay. So can you all see? Yeah, cool. Can you see the toolkit? Sorry, I'm experimenting with a new monitor setup and
Yeah, we can see the first page.
it says welcome to the toolkit.
Yep.
Cool. So the toolkit lives in a platform called Podia, which is it's a learning management system. So it just organizes all of the training materials and the resources, like the digital templates, the facilitation, the team presentation decks. And so what it does is it allows you to stream all of the training videos, and including videos like this that just kind of welcome you to the toolkit. And then it also allows, it's a repository of all the files that I continue to update in the background, and then I put them back into the toolkit. So each time, if you were to take the toolkit, each time that you would come back in and log back in, you'd see all the latest and greatest, and then you could download some of the latest files. What I haven't figured out as a great way is, other than just to make announcements of updates, what would be great is if Podia eventually allows you to know all the, sort of like a change, a versioning system, so that you could, when you log back in, you could see what's been updated and changed. But until then, I send out updates to say, hey, I've updated these templates. You should go check out the latest version of the toolkit. And then beyond all of the resources are these videos where I step you through the process and what you need to know, some pro tips as a facilitator. The big thing that most people are excited about inside the toolkit are these are the digital templates that come with it. And so there's templates today that exist inside of Miro, which is one online collaboration tool. And then there's similar templates within Mural, which is the other. Envision's Freehand is in the works. They're working on some updates to their platform. And then I'm going to create a freehand version. And so the Design Sprint Toolkit comes with 4 sets of templates. There's some pre-work activities that you could share beforehand to get people ready for the sprint, including some framing information that you may have done before your sprint. And then there are 2 versions of the ideation template. So one for in-person, one for remote. Subtle changes, but just split up based on days and availability. And then the Design Sprint testing template, which is my take on adding more structure and rigor to the testing process. These are all fully editable. Any questions about, it's just a quick pass through of the toolkit itself. Any questions that you guys had about the toolkit or what's involved or the process?
No, not really.
Okay. So then let's get into Design Sprint questions. So I've been using this Miro board as a place to capture, just for 2 reasons. One is, you know, anytime you attend an event, if you think about your questions ahead of time, it's a little bit more efficient of a conversation. And then otherwise too, some people can't always, I do these once a month. So some people, the timing doesn't work out. So I'm just keeping all of the questions asked here forever. And then I upload a recording of today's event, like I did for last month's event. And then lastly, for each question, I go back and I take a time-stamped, I add a timestamp snapshot of when I answered this question, so that if you ever wanted to go back, you could just click this link and it'll take you to that exact spot in the recording today where I answered the question, which is good for other folks that want to come back and they're like, oh, this question's interesting. Let me see what Jay had to say. So that's been my experiment with using Miro for this stuff. So without further ado, I hope I'm saying your name right, Johanna?
Johanna.
Okay, totally.
Yeah, Johanna works. Yeah. I know it's the H messes it up.
Where are you from?
Sweden.
Okay, cool. You know, it's so interesting. The folks that attend most of these events and the biggest customers of my toolkits are
Mm.
from your part of the world. I don't know why.
Yeah.
I haven't really
Yeah.
been out there or done stuff out there. Maybe you guys are
But
just
it's been,
out for the truth, then the rest of
yeah,
them want to get to it
exactly.
already.
Mm.
I don't know. That's my theory. Um, so you asked how much time do you spend digging into the problem framing before the sprint? Well,
Yeah.
here's my shortest answer is about a day or two. And here's what goes into that. So I have a process to framing. In fact, if you give me 1 second, let me just show you something. I think this will be helpful to visualize it. Toolkit. Samantha, are you talking to a child or a pet?
Child.
Okay. Yeah, my little guy was sitting in the chair and I was like, I can't concentrate. You gotta go get out of here. Here. So let me. Can you all see that? I realize there's a box missing over to the left. So the purple, I don't know if that's a chevron or what it's called. The purple, the pink workshop chevron. Whoa. That is the framing workshop. And so when I do it in person, when I used to do it in person, it used to be a day's worth of activity. When I do it remotely, I tend to split it up in 2 half-day sessions or so. And then the bigger question is like, what goes into that? Because it's already hard enough to get people together for a sprint, like a 1-week sprint, that like we're still not there for most cultures. They're like, oh, I'll give you an hour, not a week. That's crazy. So the question behind that I tend to get is like, how do you convince people to do more work in addition to meeting for the sprint? So what I tell them out of the gate is, if we do the investment to do some framing, number one, we're going to make sure that we're running a sprint on the right thing. Number two, we're probably going to win back a big chunk of that time, like the upfront understanding and alignment phase of a sprint. And it's going to be more informed. So we're not adding more time on top, which that tends to get people over the cliff of feeling like they're spending or devoting more time. But then you can see there's stuff that I do as a facilitator and an organizer, as a UX researcher, that goes into it to make sure that even my framing session is set up for success. So like 1 week before framing, I'll do interviews. I'll do like stakeholder interviews with 4 or 5 folks, like people that may be part of the conversation with lots of influence, or otherwise folks that can't join but are interested in the conversation. Let's just say there could be some wins or some changes that they're overseeing. They might be needing to send people to it. So I would interview 4 or 5 people in advance just to hear from them. What are the trends they're seeing? What are some of the questions they'd like to get answers to? Where are they seeing things going? What's not been working? So really just getting their perspective, and ultimately, how should we constrain this conversation? What are some of the guardrails that we should be thinking about? So I talk with those folks. I do my own sort of heads down research around the space that I'm learning about as I'm interviewing. And then I get people ready for the workshop itself. So I start that process about 1 to 2 weeks earlier. If I get the sense from the team that there's not much information and it's a new space altogether, then I might partner with their research team to do some rapid rounds of interviews. Like, in other words, going out to the market and saying, we're looking at this space. What can you tell us about what that experience is like for you today? What are some of the pain points? So I'm doing some pre-validation on the problem itself or the space itself. And then I bring the stakeholder interviews, the research, any additional research that I've done, I bring that all into the framing workshop as a way to kick off the conversation itself, just so that it's a designed conversation and not just like, what do you want to talk about today? So all in all, when I do framing, it takes me about 1 to 2 weeks of not every day, but 1 to 2 weeks of prep, and then 1 to 2 days of actually running the workshop itself. Does that all make sense?
Yeah, it does. And I'm thinking that if you put that time into it, then maybe it's easier to choose who's gonna join the workshop and what kind of competence we need or which part.
Yeah, exactly. So like one of the reasons that I almost always do framing before sprints is to know who should be in the room, right? Like who has on the business side, who has sort of the vision, the budget, and the need for figuring out answers to these questions. And then on the sort of like internal expertise side, my individual contributors, people that are in the trenches already solving near or similar problems, who needs to be part of this conversation. So that's like who should be part of the conversation is a huge driver for me to do framing before sprints.
Do you usually start thinking about the experts as well at this time, or both experts, of course, they come in early, but the test people and everything, or is that?
I do, yeah, especially at the end of framing. Once my framing process includes like understanding who's our proto persona, who do we want to target first. As opposed to just kind of like jumping into a sprint. And so like on Tuesday or Wednesday, now I'm scrambling to find experts, to find customers to test things out on. So yeah, by the end of framing, I always put 1 week between framing and sprints, because that's the week that I'm doing additional research. I'm reaching out to potential experts to come and talk with us, and definitely reaching out to potential customers that we want to test these out on.
Great.
Yeah. So, Samantha, did you have a question that you added here that I don't know if I saw anything else in here? You can just ask it too, and we can capture it separately.
No, I'm new to this environment, so I'm just trying to take in as much as possible information wise to find out, how does this work? I guess the one question that I did have is, how do you deal with in the design sprint world, how do you deal with pushback from someone that may not want to put their full all into the moment and into these workshops? Because I know they're very collaborative, and sometimes people are a little awkward when asked to do stuff like that. So how do you deal with those moments of pushback?
Yeah, and so they're very normal. So if you're getting pushback, it's very much part of the process, because it's a different way of working. I always tell people the first like dozen sprints or so that I ran, it was just like a recipe. I was just kind of showing up and going through the steps. And then more and more, I realized that I was shifting how work happened inside companies. And so there was a lot of resistance. And then within like more politically charged, toxic organizations, a lot of people might just show up because they didn't want to be necessarily excluded from the conversation, but they were like shields up most of the time. So, as I got more into sprints, I did a better job of getting the team to feel safe, that they can spend some time. And I would do like 1 or 2 hour like team building workshops with them in advance. Oftentimes, like the person that hired me to run the sprint, I would tell them, don't even mention that we're going to do a sprint. Don't call it anything. Just say that we're going to get together to talk about what's been working, what's not. Maybe even just if you want to call it a retrospective or something like that. So I try to keep terminology out of it as best I can for groups just getting started. When I want to inch them toward a sprint, I do like a half-day session where I start to introduce to them some of the principles. And there's a balance between having fun versus seeing value in it. So if I just show up and play games with them for 2 hours and don't connect it to what are we learning, what are we seeing, what do we want to take into our work, then it's like that felt like a waste of time. like I can have fun after work. So I just start to slowly introduce it. It really depends on even the sprint itself is kind of like a customer journey. So where are my customers, the people that are going to be in the sprint? Where are they on the journey of leaning into design thinking and sprints and new ways of working together? So I work with them as they get through it, as they get closer and closer. But like leave the jargon out, do things in small bursts and chunks. Think about the personal needs and wants of folks. So like interview your people that you might join your first sprints and just ask them, like, what are the challenges you're facing? What do you hope we can accomplish better as a team over the coming years, right? And start to like bring that back into the initial workshops that you run and organize. But it won't, yeah, it certainly doesn't tend to happen overnight. But then once it does, it's a little bit of like a spark. And then you have this complete shift where it went from like, I don't want to do that. It's called a design sprint. I'm an engineer. I don't do that stuff, whatever. I was a software engineer. And then you like this FOMO moment happens where like, oh, that happened from a sprint. I want to be part of the next one, make sure I'm involved. And then you have to almost do this thing where you're saying like, sure, this one's full, but the next one. So it's an interesting moment. You have like a very different things just shift over time. That's all. I'm thinking about resources. So can you tell me a little bit more about the work that you do? Because then I can potentially just share a couple links that you can look at.
Yeah, right now I work, I'm in an administrative role in an innovation center in a college.
Okay.
So, but I'm starting I've learned design thinking through teaching it to students and watching it be taught. So I'm right now taking a course in UX design and trying to figure out that next step into the real world and not necessarily the academic world of teaching it, but more doing it.
Mm.
So we have done little design sprints with our students, but it's more of what's the problem that you want to work on and more of creating the mindset of using design thinking in their day-to-day lives rather than solving a problem for a company or solving something for that. So that's where I come from in this arena.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. What I'll do afterward, so that we're not, because there's only a couple of us here, so I won't keep you guys while I'm hunting through files and videos that I could share with you. I'll do a quick recap email after this, and I'll send you a couple things that I think about that might be helpful. Cool.
Thank you.
Yeah, of course. Any other questions that you two wanted to cover today?
I put some smiley faces on the mirror board as well.
Oh, this little one.
It was a tiny one.
Yeah, so let me do like a quick recap of it, and then by all means you can click this link here and you can watch how I answered this José's question. Do we need to get involved? My quickest response to this is for the longest time I've told people don't try to facilitate and be part of the conversation, because the facilitator has a lot of power and can really bias and influence the conversation and the decisions, but also your ability to facilitate. And once you really, really get good at facilitating groups, I don't know where you're at on that journey, but once you really get good, the moment you start to participate, this happened for me a few weeks ago. I had to participate because my client's team just decided not to show up. So I had to roll up my sleeves and get involved. And I noticed that my ability to like see the big picture and manage the conversation and see the energy and all that stuff just like fell way off. So I would always encourage folks to just facilitate or just be part of the conversation, but try not to do both. I understand that's hard because many companies don't have like full-time facilitator roles. It's just people that are designers or researchers or product people that are jumping in.
Oh, that's good.
Yeah. I think I said some and more in this link here if you want to watch it afterward.
Yeah, I'm gonna do that.
Cool. What else?
I think I had one
Ah,
at the bottom.
this one here. Yeah. What are the most common pitfalls you encounter?
It's always fun to hear what other
Yeah.
people think about
Most
that
of them
one.
I forget what I told how I answered this for Charlotte, but if I were to answer it today, I'd say most of it comes down to managing people.
Yeah.
Most of it is like people, like what Samantha asked about, like pushback, confusion around the naming, around what are the expectations, good and bad, thinking like, I could never allow my team to show up for a whole week, but I'll give you like a half a day or a day. And then completely flip to that is if we're going to spend a week on this, they expect the whole thing to be figured out. I'm like, no, of course not. We're not going to have the whole thing vetted in a couple days. So misaligned expectations. What other pitfalls? Not framing an important problem beforehand, right? And so like running sprints just for the sake of saying we ran a sprint, we did the same thing. We got into sprints and we're like, we're going to run sprints on everything. And then we quickly realized that we're like, some things don't need a sprint. They just need a little bit of A/B testing, or some things are just not important problems and important enough to be running a sprint on because people don't really care about solutions there. I'd say those are the two that stand out to me in this moment. But I'm, again, go see how I answered that with Charlotte a couple weeks ago.
Yeah, I'll do that.
Cool. Yeah, and then what's this? There's a link to, these are just toolkit links. I think what I'll make a note of is add more resources to Miro board. Yeah, so what I'll try to do, Samantha, is add a couple things, some things that I've learned from, or just that I know are good things that you can kind of build on top of. Cool. What else? Do you all use Miro or Mural or none of the above?
I was actually going to ask you that. Which do you prefer, Miro or Mural? I've worked on both. I learned Mural first and then found Miro later. Which one is your favorite?
Well, let's see. Mural and I have a longer history together, and I have friends and whatnot, and a loose partnership with the company. They treat me really well. They're like super proactive with their community. So like from like a holistic company perspective, I love the Mural team and I know them really well. Miro, just as a tool in itself, sometimes I have an easier time using Miro than I do Mural. If you're used to design tools, there's just more overlap, let's just say. But they also are building up their community and their partnerships and things like that. So both companies are great, honestly. The tools work really well. And then you have Envision's freehand coming up in the rearview mirror. And Envision's a bit of a titan. So I imagine at some point they're going to create a very comparable product to both of these. And they also have some great team members in there. So keep an eye on freehand especially if you're like a studio or whatever, if you guys use Envision's platform.
I have a question about the time we're living now with COVID and everything on the computer instead of seeing each other in person. How much have you changed, like the sprint setup? Do you do exactly the same as you would if you met all in person, or have you done some tweaks?
A lot of
your
tweaks.
Experience?
A lot of tweaks. And so what I'll do, let me, one sec, Google Relay. I was part of an event of That's interesting. I'll share a link to it. Google Relay async sprints. So make this short. Google every year up until this year ran an annual conference based in San Francisco, then based in Boulder, of like people around the globe that have been running sprints and like evangelizing and talking about them. So I was fortunate enough to get invited to those. And then this year, for a few reasons, including COVID, they ran more of a virtual event, and it was called Relay. I'm surprised that it's not coming up in Google search results, but we split. There were like 60 of us, and they split us up into teams of like 7 or 8 folks, and each group had a theme to work through. My group's theme happened to be running more asynchronous and remote workshops, including sprints. And so we put some ideas together about important things to think about when designing how you want to shape your sprints. So that's like sort of like once I can share links to that stuff, I know that they're pushing out all the content that we created soon. That's sort of like a do-it-yourself. You can figure it out for yourself. If you were to ask me how have I changed it, I think that actually was your question. More or less, I cap time together to about 3 or 4 hours max. And I take much more advantage of asynchronous offline remote work. So I do a lot more preliminary gathering of information, sharing that with team members, asking them, inviting them to go through that and be prepared to have a conversation so that we can spend less together time, screen time. And then having like really strict, rigorous control around what people do when we're not together. Like, we're going to meet back at this time. You're going to be responsible for these things. These are the things that I expect that we're going to be talking about. These are the decisions that we want to make when we next meet up. That means that you have to do this, this, and this. So really being like really highly structured with asynchronous time. But all together, I still run sprints inside of 1 week. So I'm still able to do framing a week between, and then a 3, 4, 5 day sprint, depending on the complexity and how new it is, inside of a week. So altogether, I tried not to break what people have come to understand as a design sprint, which is like a 1 week process.
Great, thank you.
Yeah. Oops. Okay. Great. What else? Okay. By all means, please go through any of the links in there from previous questions. If they resonate with you, you can watch the answers in there. You could watch the whole recording up here. I'm going to upload today's down here later this afternoon or by tomorrow. And Samantha, I'll also add a couple resources that you might want to check out. Mostly like specifically about sprints themselves, not so much like larger design thinking. Yeah, and then any other questions, the recap email will come from me. So if you have more questions, you can come to next month's or just fire away questions over email. I'll try to help out. Cool. All right. Have a great day.
Yeah.
Have a great evening.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Same.
Okay.
Thank you.
Bye.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay.
Bye.
Bye-bye.